All right, can you hear me? Audible? Yeah. All right. Okay, everyone, welcome back to the second panel discussion for the day, which is on Will Open Network for Digital Commerce, ONDC, liberate e-commerce. And we have with us our moderator, Supratim Chakraborty, partner at Khaitan and Co. And on the panel, we have Praveen Dhabhai, COO and Director, Payworld, Anuj Khosla, CEO Digital Business at Hitachi Payment Services, and Tanu Banerjee, TMT Partner at Khaitan Co. And over to you. Can you hear me? Check. Yeah? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And we have a great set of panelists. And we'll be taking over, I think, and speaking on one of the hottest topics of today that is there, which is Will Open Network for Digital Commerce Liberate Ecommerce? Many thinkers say that basically it is a reimagining of e-commerce ecosystem, learning from the UPI ecosystem with the objective to actually democratize the market. It is an attempt to switch from marketplace-based ecosystem to a protocol-based ecosystem. So with that, I would pose my first question to Anuj, and that is, how do you see ONDC transforming India's e-commerce industry? Do you think it will live up to the expectations that people have? There's quite a bit of hype right now.
Thanks. Absolutely, I think it's a great idea. And there are two reasons I would like to quote here. Firstly, for any idea to be successful, the timing has to be right. And I believe that the time of launch is absolutely perfect. We are just out of the pandemic, and the consumer behavior has changed drastically in last 2 years. In fact, if we look at ourselves, right now we order groceries at home. We order food at home more than we go out eating. We order our medicines and many more such categories. In fact, I spoke about these three categories is because these were very, very conventional offline categories 3 years back. And now, as we see, everybody is now ordering in. So that is the first reason. Secondly, I would like to quote what Mr. Nandan Nilekani said at the launch of ONDC. So he said there are, for any initiative to be successful, there has to be those 4 or 5 things to make it right up there. So firstly, he said there has to be a real market or social need. And clearly, as we are seeing e-commerce blooming everywhere, small businesses are also looking at avenues to be a part of this e-commerce bandwagon. So ONDC is clearly, that. Secondly, there has to be a government push, and which is pretty much there when it comes to the initiative. Thirdly, the technology has to be right, and the kind of people who are behind ONDC, the entire setup, I am sure these are some great brains, and they are making the technology work there. Fourthly, the adopters who are going to participate in the ONDC platform, clearly where we are right now, we have a fairly good consumer, marketplaces ecosystem is pretty much there. We have a seller ecosystem. So we'll see a lot of these players coming in and participating in the ONDC initiative. And fifthly, and the last one but not the least, there has to be an umbrella entity running the initiative. So ONDC is that umbrella entity which is owning it and will make sure that it is going to be a big success.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Excellent points. I think next I'll go to you, Praveen. And my question to you is, how do you anticipate small-scale sellers to compete with existing e-commerce giants who come with an established consumer base and market recognition? How successful will ONDC be at ensuring that a level playing field is there and an equal discoverability of sellers?
Yeah, so if you see the ONDC platform, it's a network, and there will be buyer apps, there will be seller apps. And the idea is that to the smaller rural areas or tier 2, tier 3 cities also, sellers can be onboarded onto the ONDC platform and sell their goods to the people who want to buy or nearby places. In my view, the ecosystem has to be created to assist those sellers to to get onboarded onto ONDC. Like when we are comparing with UPI or financial inclusion, you can say it is e-commerce inclusion, where the companies like Payworld, which we are into financial inclusion space, we will through our retailers, we will create infrastructure so that we can help people to onboard onto the ONDC system and create our seller apps, train them so that they can be there can be assistance to get onto the ONDC system. And I think that will be the differentiator between the established player, because the idea of ONDC is not to cannibalize the existing sellers, but grow the seller numbers and get on to the people who are already not on the online digital commerce.
Right. Thank you so much. And I think a tricky one for you, Tanu, right now. Do you think that any incentives are there for large e-commerce players in India to also have their presence in the ONDC network? Will existing e-commerce companies have to remodel their business strategies once ONDC picks up pace?
Thanks, Supratim. No, I think absolutely. The biggest, I think, incentive or an advantage for.
Yeah, I think.
Okay. Now I was saying that no, absolutely. Today, I would think the biggest advantage for even a bigger platform today is just access to more consumers, right, in the ONDC network. And today, typically, an Amazon or a Flipkart, every user, every buyer has to be separately registered to each of these applications, right? I have to be a user of Amazon, I have to be a user of Flipkart, Myntra, and so on. And what I think ONDC would therefore change, and which I think is definitely a game changer in some ways, is that there's access to consumers across these platforms. So there is a larger sort of consumer base to work with. That's one. The other, I think, is each of these apps, if we just sort of look at the current dynamics, there's a lot of expense and a lot of effort that is put into customer acquisition also. Be it incentives, discounts, end of season sales, or whatever. And I think a large part of that can be reduced just because you have access to a larger consumer base. So I feel those are definitely pluses here. Existing models being changed, I don't know exactly how it would be changed, but I would think that definitely, for example, if there's a reduced expense on customer acquisition, perhaps that can be focused towards other niche areas. So yes, some amount of remodeling would happen, but I would think it will only be for the benefit.
Right. Thank you. I think I'll just add on some present day statistics so that our audience is able to understand where we stand today. Really, our Kirana stores are presently 80% of the retail market. However, only very few are digitally enabled. I think the number is around 0.125%. So you can imagine the situation. There are about 12 million Kiranas approximately. Only 20% of internet users in India are online shoppers, actually. Of course, when we look at it from a different perspective, it's the third largest online shopper base after USA and China. Retail penetration, when we look at the numbers in terms of GMV, it's only 4.3% in India. Whereas in China, it's 25%, South Korea 26%, and UK 23%. So there's huge scope, With this, I will move back to you, Praveen. Sorry, I think let me ask this question to Anuj first. What broad policy consideration should ONDC set out before it becomes operational at a national level?
See, for any entity to set up a pan-India presence, you need to take care of a lot of things. Firstly, this is clearly a more complex kind of a ecosystem creation, because we are talking about a consumer, we are talking about consumer apps, we are talking about sellers, we're talking about seller apps. So clearly wiring them together would need a lot of work. Right from who can participate, so the policies have to be crystal clear. There has to be a regular process of checking each and every seller if they are meeting the criteria or not. what kind of customer issues or grievances are there in terms of a particular seller or in terms of a platform in general. Also, this also, the ONDC also brings in the logistics setup into this. So once we go pan India, we need to make sure that, we are covering each and every pin code in the country. We are also making sure that we win customer trust at the end of the day. So the biggest metrics for ONDC to really watch out for is how is the customer experience at the end of the day, how many repeat customers are there using the platform, and in general, how are we handling the customer grievances at the end of the day. So closure onto those are important. The UI UX is also important from a customer perspective. So some of the policies around these have to be in place, before we go to a pan-India kind of a launch.
Right. Thank you so much. The next question to you, Praveen. We are observing that several nationalized banks have taken up stakes in ONDC. What is in it for them, really? What do you think? Is this an opportunity for them to make a deeper inroad into the payment and settlement segment of ONDC?
Yeah, so you see, all nationalized as well as private banks now to grow, they have to get into Bharat or what you say is next half billion. And acquiring customers or SMEs to provide loans is a very expensive affair for especially private banks or for that matter PSU banks also. So through ONDC, what I feel is the banks are trying to do is that get onto the ONDC, get the data, and because the data is digitized, so basis the transaction done on the ONDC, because most of the people in tier 2, tier 3 cities, the SMEs and the smaller retailers, as you said, Kirana stores 80%, they don't have any credit history, they don't have any means of providing their CIBIL scores. So, and the banks also would like to extend credit to them so that they can grow the business and with minimum cost involved. So I think ONDC can address that issue because of the data available, and they can give small ticket loans basis the technology and the data.
Just to add there, just to add to your point, so any entity which has a large customer base on the consumer side, so it could be a telecom, it could be a bank. ONDC is a platform which is of interest to them, because then they can open their customer base to the whole seller ecosystem, and that is what ONDC is doing. It is bringing the two seller and the the buyer ecosystem together, and hence it makes sense.
Absolutely, completely.
And Super, just maybe to add slightly offside sort of comment here. If we just you spoke about Kirana stores and how many they are, and so much of commerce or sort of happens from their retail commerce. And I think one leg that will be vacant, perhaps we look at all of your Kirana stores, they still work on a account basis. Every customer, every people across will have an account. So I think that in a very micro level, they are all micro lenders to users outside, and ONDC perhaps that will be a vacuum. And who knows, maybe the financial institutions or smaller lending institutions could sort of benefit from that, because that is definitely a space that will be sort of absent in the ONDC network.
Yeah, agree, and fantastic points. Praveen mentioned about data. So, Tanu, I think the next question to you is on the data front. Do you preempt any data protection concerns arising with regard to the vast amount of data that will flow through the ONDC network?
Yeah, I think very valid concern for sure. I think, and given data is oil today, but I think ONDC in its statement at least sort of the current strategy is that ONDC itself will not sort of monetize data or hold data. And therefore data will perhaps continue to be on the seller side apps and the buyer side apps. But having said that maybe they don't have access to data, or maybe perhaps they would not use it to monetize it in any way. So it will be a sort of more Yeah, so I think perhaps ONDC itself will not sort of have control over data. But having said that, I think data leakage, data compromise, security, these are also big concerns. So whether they have access or they do not have access, I think adequate security protocols being put in place would be sort of essential, is what I would say.
Right. I think so, so. Some of the broad brush principles have been called out that probably the data protection related principles would be respected. But I believe that what we have to watch out for is the granular reality that finally pans out and how that is managed. Okay, because considering the ecosystem, it could be a little challenging, and probably for some point of time, it could be a bit work in progress.
Absolutely.
Right. So I think with this, I'll move on to Anuj, and this is a very important question. Um, since you're closely associated with the payment and fintech space, how similar would you reckon the ONDC is to the UPI model? We all know that there are similarities, there are far more dissimilarities, and things like those. Would you agree that ONDC network will require a more nuanced approach due to the involvement of various subjective variables you're just mentioning, such as quality of products or reliability of sellers or efficiency in delivery and things like those?
So, I'm sure all of us have heard this. The way UPI has democratized payments, ONDC is going to democratize retail. But, and it is modeled around the UPI overall setup. But my sense is that ONDC is more similar to a payments flow. For example, I'm sure all of you know this. In a card ecosystem, we call something as a four-party model, which is basically, there is a card holder, there is a card issuing bank, there is a network which sits in between, there is a merchant, and then there is a acquiring bank. Same way, in case of ONDC, there is a buyer, there is a buyer app, then there is ONDC in between, which is wiring these all together. There is a seller app and there is a seller. And ONDC is in general, a policy maker that creates the policy, who can come on board, how do we handle the customer grievance. For example, in the cards payments, there is a way to dispute a transaction, which is called a chargeback. There is a way which is the next level of a chargeback, which is arbitration. Same way, ONDC is going to list out these policies to handle some of these. Also, there are value-added services which are available in case of a card network. Same way over here, the value-added services, the logistics setup, the payment clearing and settlement. So all those things are being put in place by ONDC and all the policies around it. And hence, I would like to draw a parallel to a card network. In case of ONDC, it has a very, very similar sort of rails which they are building here.
Right. Thank you. Back to you, Tanu. The question is, do you see possibilities of open network model proposed by ONDC being emulated by any other sector in India? And this question is also open to others. Feel free if you want to add anything.
I think I'll answer this in two parts. One is, in our heads, typically when we say an e-commerce platform, the first platform you'll think of is an Amazon or a Flipkart, right? So I would think with ONDC, there would be a lot of consolidation of, different sort of e-commerce. For example, food delivery, these sort of parallel e-commerce ecosystems would sort of consolidate into ONDC. So that's one. The other, I think, I don't know if it will happen or not, but I think one sector that could emulate this structure is the content delivery space. Today, just like, you have different accounts on e-commerce platforms, you also have different accounts on, different OTTs, different digital platforms, right? There's some platform for news, there is something for content, and something for, web series and so on. And imagine, a network which sort of combines all of these together and accesses, sort of across. So I think that's one sector that could definitely look at it. Of course, there are devices like an Amazon Fire Stick which will, help you access multiple platforms at the same time. But what I'm saying is that ONDC structure is a different structure. It is a network that helps you access consumers and access goods and services bought by different sellers together, and maybe there could be some parallels to that in the content entertainment sector.
I'd like to add, I think credit will be the next one because the work has already started on open network for credit. I don't remember the name, but ONC. So I think that will be the next big step because there also the borrowers and lenders will come on that platform or network, not platform.
Right. So thank you for the inputs. We have some more questions, but I think we will, sort of break now and ask the audience in case you have any questions, and then we will get back to our final set of questions to the speakers. So if you can please raise your hands if you have any questions. I think if you can please pass the mic there. If you can please introduce yourself, your organization, if you're fine, and then ask your question.
Hi, I am Akshay. I just wanted to know if there is going to be some restriction on how many sellers or what kind of inventory and anything like that that will be a part of the system once it is up.
Ideally, it should be a part of the policy. I mean, there are clearly certain items which you can't sell because of various regulations. And that is going to be the role of ONDC, what you can sell, who can participate. As long as you are meeting the criteria, as long as you are following the protocol, I think more the merrier. Because if we are talking about a pan-India kind of a rollout, then we need as many participants as possible. And the good thing about India right now is that we have a very, very evolved, ecosystem in terms of seller apps, in terms of consumer apps. So ideally, my sense is that everybody should jump into this because of the vast opportunity. And you spoke about some numbers that retail is so underpenetrated in the digital space. Ideally, even a very small mom and pop store, local kirana store should be participating in this through, a partner, and should get discoverable across the country, and every consumer should get that choice of buying from that entity if the price is right, if the quality of product is right. So my answer is that everybody should be there, shouldn't be any restriction, as long as we are meeting the regulatory framework.
No, actually, what
I think
just
what Anuj just, I'll second it, that is that you compared it with the card network. So from the acquiring side, there is a list of things which cannot be
Correct. Correct.
Yeah, so similarly a list will be there which they cannot be onboarded onto a ONDC.
I'm actually sorry. I wanted to ask the categories. Like there is clothing, there is fashion, there is beauty, there is gadgets, there is electronics. In that sense,
Everything except the banned categories.
Yeah,
so
that is
there are
fair.
certain categories which are not allowed as per local regulations.
Yeah.
Other than that, everything, I don't think there is any restriction as far as I understand this.
Also, I think a very interesting twist to this is probably we will get to see some very specialized players coming into play. For example, today Nykaa in the cosmetic space is quite ahead in the race as compared to a general marketplace that we have been observing. So probably this ecosystem will also push these kind of players quite ahead.
See, like I mentioned, pandemic has changed the customer behavior. In fact, very, very traditional categories are now sold digitally. So, I mean, 3 years back, we used to buy our grocery from a local, vendor. And now most of us order online. So once that local vendor also becomes a part of the ONDC network, then clearly you can buy from your local street vendor, but digitally would be the journey. So, I mean, that is the change that ONDC can bring into the whole,
Interestingly, the first ONDC transaction in India was dhania bought on Paytm.
So to add to that, what during pandemic, what happened is that all these kirana stores, they started taking orders on WhatsApp. They started taking payments on Google Pay or Phone Pay, etc. So they were digitizing it. They were doing it, but ONDC will help them to do in their catchment area, do the selling in a more structured way.
And even expand beyond their
Yes,
catchment
of-
area.
yeah,
So, I
yeah.
mean, that's the beauty that a seller sitting in some remote area can, then be a seller for somebody who's sitting in a large city and vice versa. So, clearly, it's a play which is pan India. And the small businesses may not just restrict themselves to their catchment area, but be a supplier to somebody who's say 1,000 kilometers away. So that is the beauty of the platform here.
Right. Any other question? Yeah.
Hi, Amit Shahani here. My question is related to something that Anuj I think touched upon, which is basically what about customer grievances, right? If I take a UPI, my personal opinion, while I don't pay anything for UPI right now as a consumer, the dispute resolution is far stunted as opposed to using a card association where I pay more for the transaction and I get assurance of the of my grievances. How does that translate to ONDC? I mean, again, you're going to democratize the platform. You're going to bring down the cost. Have many sellers. Right? Today, if I buy something from Amazon and I'm not happy with it, I just return it. Right? How will that pan out when it comes to ONDC?
So I think, and that is the reason I drew a parallel to a cards network here and not UPI, because the customer grievance management is the most important part of this. And my understanding of this is that in case of a dispute, customer will go to his consumer app, and that will get connected to the seller app and then to the seller. I mean, that is the exact mechanism that happens in a four-party model. While the policies will be made by ONDC around it, how the grievance will be handled, what will be the mechanism, how a refund will move in case there is a refund, how the product will be picked up. But clearly, it will follow, the same mechanism like a four-party model, where you go to your part of, the world and not directly to the seller in case of a dispute.
Also, I think the recommendation has been that dispute resolution should be through Niti Aayog based ODR. That's what has been recommended.
Right.
I think there's another question there.
Hello. Yeah. Um, Good morning to all. Myself Shubham from Kotak Mahindra Bank, and I handle the digital payment alliances and banking alliances. So I just like to add one more point regarding why banks are getting into this is because we missed the UPI bandwagon. So this is one more reason that we want to start up with that and get into the picture at the starting of it. My question is, since we want to break this duopoly of Amazon and Flipkart, mostly of that. So they own the loyalty of the customers, right? Most of us over here have the Amazon and Flipkart app on our phone. So how do you think the banks will break on this on the buyer app of the side? Because initially the banks are getting to the buyer side and then they will get into the seller side. But I am sure that these e-commerce giants will get into the ONDC system. But how do you expect banks to break that duopoly on the buyer app of the side? Thank you.
I think what I feel is that it will be the cross sell. Like today, bank, apart from financial transactions, they do bill payments, they do travel. Like for example, for Kotak, you can book a air ticket, you can do a lot of things on that. So it will be and for banks, that will not be the focused area to do e-com transactions, but they would like to offer the services so that their customer need not go out of their app. I think that's what I can
Absolutely. So in this way, you are going to create engagement on your own app. Your customer is initiating that transaction through your consumer app which you have, and then the consumer goes on towards the seller ecosystem. So it's a great way of keeping your engagement going with your customer base on the app that you have.
Right. Any further questions? If not, then I'd like to.
Supratim,
There's
we
a
have
question.
one question
Okay,
there, I think.
please.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Vineet. I'm from D91 Labs in Bangalore. My question was around acquiring, the onboarding process. For example, like you mentioned the immense potential that there is for Kirana stores. So in terms of onboarding, how do you see that process panning out? So like if, for instance, there are going to be assisted models that are going to sort of help small mom and pop stores to be part of the whole network, and what are the implications of that in terms of the cost for these mom and pop stores to basically part
See,
of this?
I strongly believe that it has to be a assisted model, because if you see QR code success or Amazon sellers onboarding, there were always an assistance. Like for putting the QR code by Google Pay, Phone Pay, Paytm, lakhs of people were on the field to put that QR code. Similarly, on ONDC also, to get all these Kirana stores and small street vendors, there has to be assistance. And I think companies like Payworld will get into that space to train them people, help assist them to onboard, assist them to transact. And what will be the commercials is yet to be seen. I think it's too early to say.
I think there's another question. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Radhika Biani from Narottam Sikh Family Office. My question is that will the smaller players get pulled into price war forcefully because of ONDC?
Any thoughts?
I think great thought for sure. No, I think definitely a great point and concern also. And today, you can't shy away from the fact that the bigger e-commerce giants obviously incentivize, offer discounts and so on, which maybe the local players are unable to do at the moment. But I also feel that in a common network, your general market forces and competition is going to drive the pricing. So somewhere I think perhaps at the beginning it could be a challenge, but it's going to eventually, correct itself on its own, is what I think.
Thank you. I think then we will move on to our last segment, which is a quick fire or a rapid fire question round for all the panelists here. I'll start with you, Anuj, and then maybe Praveen, you can answer the same question, and then Tanu. The first question is, will ONDC match the success of UPI?
Well, I think absolutely, because like I said, the timing is perfect. And secondly, there is a huge opportunity. We are talking about $1 trillion retail opportunity. If ONDC can get even 10, 15, 20% of it, we are talking about $200 billion. And clearly, it's with the evolved app ecosystem, I think everything is in place for it to be a big success like UPI.
Yeah, I agree with Anuj, but what I feel is it will take time, because UPI also took time. It didn't became successful overnight with push from all players, providers, government. So similarly, ONDC will be as successful as UPI, but it might take some time to reach that point.
I think I'm just going to add to what Praveen is saying, that yes, definitely it's a model that nobody else has sort of tried in the world right now, and definitely democratic. So I again think that yes, it is going to be a success, but maybe it's going to take longer, as compared to UPI, just because there are more complicated ecosystems, sort of, and participants in the system here. For example, UPI as a structure or as a product, does not need logistical on-ground support, right? Here you would need that. Similarly, UPI is in the financial space, which is already a regulated, sort of space. The system participants there are regulated entities. They work in a certain regime, as opposed to the ONDC or the e-commerce space, where there are different participants. There are some regulations, some contours for everybody, but there is not a united regulatory front right now. So I think those are just things which is sort of a work in progress. And once we cross over that, I think it will then sort of see success.
Thank you. What is the one thing about ONDC that scares you?
I mean, the only scary part about ONDC is the scale that it can reach. And I'm saying so is because, Tanu mentioned, it's a very complex structure. We are talking about bringing in different stakeholders together. And in such a case where the buyer doesn't know the seller, they could be 1,000 kilometers apart. Handling customer queries, grievances becomes very important. And like I said, user experience is the most important thing. So managing some of those things once you reach scale is a complicated thing to do. And hence, that is a scary part, but I am sure ONDC will handle that well with the policies which will be in place and which are already in place. And hopefully when we scale it up, we are, not facing any of those challenges.
Praveen?
Yeah, I think what Anuj is saying is correct, but another thing is that who will be the responsible in case of the grievances are not addressed? Because from buyer side or from the consumer app side, like he gave an example, Kotak will put it. Now, if a Kotak customer has got a problem, will it hit Kotak's reputation or the bank's reputation or the supplier's reputation? So that has to be addressed because presently the e-commerce platforms, they take the responsibility of satisfying the consumer. In that case, who will be doing? But I think sure the, the, the policymakers must have thought about it and it will be addressed with the correct policies.
Tanu?
I have a similar take, but slightly different as well. Uh, one, I think what sort of scares me, so to say, despite all the positives that the network and the structure offers, is we spoke about data initially. One, just the amount of data that's going to flow through this network. And you have so many participants. You have sellers, you have buyers, you have logistic vendors, you have financial institutions into, all baked into the same sort of ecosystem. So that's one. And the other being that, ONDC could eventually, it is one network which is going to sort of stitch together all of these participants, right? So the policies that eventually will come in place will sort of become quasi regulation of sorts, right? Which is where I see this going, which is not a bad thing at all. Any sort of regulation, having a regime around is has its pluses, but so long as again there's some sort of balance, I think it will be fine.
Great. So coming to the last question of this rapid fire round, what is the most revolutionary aspect of ONDC according to you?
I think the idea itself and the way it has been conceptualized, we didn't get carried away with the fact that we should get a super app going. It's not a super app, and it is actually connecting the super apps together. So that idea itself is, I think, great the way it has been thought through. And now execution is the key, but my sense is that that's the biggest part about ONDC.
So I think the network is created or rails have been created. Now it's up to the ecosystem to put a bullet train on it or put a malgadi.
I think what is really revolutionary is, just how inclusive the system could be, from just really micro players, smaller players, large players, sellers, buyers of all types and all stratas. I think is just a very, very inclusive concept, which I think is amazing.
Right. So thank you for your inputs. This is truly an unbundling of various parts of the e-commerce value chain. Let me tell you what is the goal of ONDC by 2027. The goal is 90 crore buyers on the network. India presently has about 14 crore online shoppers, 12 lakh sellers to be there, around INR 6.5 lakh crore GMV. I think currently it is 2.85 lakh crore and 730 crore of annual purchase enabled on the network. That's the plan. Hopefully, we will be there. Thank you so much, panelists. Thank you, audience, for your patience and for the great questions. We hope great success to ONDC, and hopefully there'll be more conversations on this very soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.